Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we're going to be discussing Mel Gibson sharing the gospel on the Joe Rogan Experience. Last week, we talked about Wesley Huff doing it, and this week, we're going to talk about Mel Gibson doing it. And I don't know if this is the first time he's done it on Joe Rogan, but this does correlate with what I have been saying is going on in the country, and that is, I do believe a national revival is underway, and I think it's largely being seen in the bro culture. And I have some personal anecdotal evidence for this in my own life from what I've seen, but there's also data to suggest that this is going on with the sale of Bibles increasing rapidly and other metrics. And I think these events uh, on the Joe Rogan Experience do signify or are emblematic of what I believe is a national revival. So last week we talked about Wesley Huff. This week we're going to talk about Mel Gibson, the very famous Mel Gibson, and we're going to talk about the good and the bad of what he said. But first, I want you to know Evangelical Dark Web is a Christian news gathering and commentary ministry. You can support our work over at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join. That's linked in the description below. I also have a book, Winning Not Winsome, 10 Commandments of Spiritual Warfare, available on Amazon, linked in the description below. And this is the video, Mel Gibson on the Joe Rogan Experience. This has 5.5 million views as of the recording here, which is higher than Wesley Huff's appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience. So he got more views, and so this actually might have had a wider reach. So let's tune into this first clip, which I think is probably the most famous clip that's been going around. I could be wrong about that, but to me, this is a clip of him standing firm on the resurrection. And I will say this, he is more firm on the resurrection than Wesley Huff was, in my opinion. But we're dealing with two different people here. One is very intellectual in Wesley Huff, and this is Mel Gibson. He's a little bit crazy, but he has a faith in God nonetheless, I believe. So here we go.
And the other aspect of that is that all the evangelists, the apostles who went out there, every single one of those guys died rather than deny their belief. And nobody dies for a lie. Nobody.
Right.
So that's part of what I'm doing. It's like showing nobody dies for a lie.
Yeah. Well, the resurrection is the one that is the most difficult for people to swallow.
Yes.
That's the one that requires the most faith.
The most faith and the most belief. Yeah. Resurrection.
Yeah.
Who gets back up 3 days later after he gets murdered in public? Who gets back up under his own power? Buddha didn't do that shit.
Right.
So.
You believe that was a real event?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
What brought you to that belief? Is this something that you've always had, or is it something?
I want to share this part as well, because the last part is where he unapologetically affirms the resurrection. So that was very good to point out by Mel Gibson. This part I want to play because it highlights his faith journey. So I think it's very important to showcase this as well, because it's pretty interesting, in my opinion. And it also probably resonates with a lot of people as well.
Something you studied it and you've come to this conclusion because of the historical accounts and.
Yes. I think as a child, one accepts things on faith because, you're raised by people who are nice to you and they believe it. And my dad was a pretty smart guy. He was like Mensa smart, like real smart. Like back in 1968, he won Jeopardy, right? And then
Really?
And then they brought all the Jeopardy winners back, and he played all the winners, and he beat all of them too. So he had a mind like a steel trap, and his memory was practically photographic. My memory is pornographic, but it's like his was like, I don't have that kind of mind.
Right.
But I'm more like, he did math, and I can't add. But so as a child, you learn these things and you accept them on faith. And I still have that faith, but as I got older, I came to it through intellect and through reading and putting things together in accounts, and then occurrences like in my own life. I mean, just recently they verified the Shroud of Turin. Have you seen that?
So they go on to nerd out about the Shroud of Turin, which is a little bit outside the scope of the video, but I do think what they dive into that in part of the conversation is pretty compelling, and it's worth listening to, in my opinion. I found this interview to be very entertaining as someone who loves film. And it makes me want to watch Apocalypto. I don't know if anyone else watched this and got the sudden urge to watch Apocalypto, but that was definitely me. Definitely had the sudden urge to watch Apocalypto. So this next part is not so good by Mel Gibson, and I'm gonna blame the Catholic Church for this, because it is their doctrine that's basically being exposed for lacking here, in my opinion, because it is their doctrine after all. So we're gonna fast forward s- several minutes here, and this part is where he kind of does not answer a classic atheistic question about what happens to the person in the jungle who's never heard the gospel before. So, a lot of people don't really understand how to answer this question. Mel Gibson takes a Catholic response to the question. At least that's what I think that he's getting his counsel from. And that does not really go very well, in my opinion. He does not give truthful doctrine, and it shows. So here's a clip of that.
And understand that it's a great deal of mercy involved in the fact that I believe that God sent his son down to tell us, okay, I'm going to ransom you people from your fallen nature, and I'll give you a roadmap on how to do it, and people do it. There's even people that do it that I've never even heard of it. You know, some guy in the jungle someplace, I'm sure.
Right.
You know, because the Creator is above the law. And it's an interesting fact to note that the first canonized saint, you know who it was?
No.
The first ever confirmed canonization as a saint was Dismas. You know who Dismas was?
No.
He was the thief on the cross next to Jesus.
Oh.
And he says to him, "You're going to be okay. This day you'll be with me." Unbaptized, criminal, all that stuff. So
Wow.
the lawmaker is above the law. So there's a lot of mercy.
What about people that never experienced Christian?
So I want to pause right there. His premise about the lawmaker being above the law, I'm not really down with that. I'm not really down with that as a mantra. Uh, and there is a lot of mercy. That I will agree with. Again, I do want to reiterate, Mel Gibson's not someone who claims to be a pastor. He is not someone who's doing apologetics ministry. Like, there's pastors who I think should be held to the highest standard for this type of thing, right? Then there's people in the middle. I would put myself in the middle. I'm not a pastor, but I'm someone who has stepped out. Like Wesley Huff, I would put in the middle because he's not a pastor that I know of. And, you know, the people who are on Christian YouTube and stuff like that. Like, if I answer a question like this, you should drag me for it. You should. But then there's laymen, like, you know, absolute laymen, and they're theological normies and stuff like that. I'm not going to drag them for this type of thing. Now, if they want to argue that, hey, homosexuality is not a sin, I will drag a normie Christian for that. Like, they need to be called out for that because that's an easy one. That is an easy kindergarten level theology question and answer that you just failed, and deliberately so because you did not want to offend. This question is a little bit harder because, first of all, the ground on in Mel Gibson's defense, the Catholic Church has bungled this question. The Reformed camp has a really solid answer to this question. People just don't like it because it says that God is not under an obligation to save people outside of his divine plan of Christ. So people don't like that because they accuse God of not being fair, and therefore God is somehow unjust. But I don't think that God needs to be fair to all humans in order to be just, because life is not fair. And we know that life is not fair, but that does not make God unjust. People don't want to articulate that. People don't want to articulate the disconnect between fairness and justice. So, with that said, Mel Gibson's answer does fall short. It is not good. It is bad, in fact. But there is a good part at the end of this. So we're going to get to that. So we're going good, bad, good is the order of this video.
Christianity. What about the
That's what I'm saying.
uncontacted
Yeah,
people?
That's right. That's what I'm saying. Some guy in the jungle.
Yeah.
It's been known that it's called invincible ignorance because they don't know what the truth is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's possible that they can be saved as well. You know.
So what are your thoughts on evolution?
So, like I said, that's a Catholic sort of Vatican II understanding. I do believe there might be groundwork in the Catholic Church prior to Vatican II for this type of answer, but I think Mel Gibson has asked people this question and he's gotten this answer and he's relaying the answer that he's gotten in the past because it was convincing enough for him. He's not coming up with this. That is for sure. He's not coming up with this. But it's not good and I do think it's outside of an orthodox belief. I don't think that that is a rational Christian belief. I think so, but nonetheless, that is the tradition he's a part of that believes that.
Wow. Eh. The Darwin thing?
Yeah.
I don't really go for it.
No?
Yeah. Ice Age, dinosaurs, what do they turn into? I mean, things became extinct at some point. I don't think I was some kind of legless thing that crawled out of the ocean. I don't think I came from that. I think I was created.
Do you think other
So that was Mel Gibson answering the question on evolution, and he did a better job with that topic than Wesley Huff did. So I do want to give credit where credit is due. He did better on that question, Wesley Huff. And because he's just flat out saying, nah, not into it. I'm not super smart, but I know that that's not true. I know that this isn't real. I know that Darwinian evolution isn't real. And you see that. Like Mel Gibson, the horseshoe theory of practical intelligence, Mel Gibson's on the tard side and he's not on the genius side when it comes to these type of topics. And I'm going to have a lot of grace with someone like that. I'm going to have a lot of grace with someone who's, on the tard side of this, but has faith, has genuine faith that I think by all accounts is real. I think he's authentic about his faith and a lot of the mistakes that he's made. And I think this last clip that I want to share is an embodiment of that. So we're going to skip ahead towards the end. And this is the context of this is they're talking more about his next film project, which will be the sequel to The Passion of the Christ. Now, if you follow me on like the Twitter sphere or whatever, you know that I'm very down on sequels that come out decades later, but maybe this time it will be different, which I've said about a lot of sequels, Happy Gilmore 2, maybe this time it will be different. But Mel Gibson elaborates on his ambitions for this project, and it does seem to be grandiose. So, but he does display a humility going into it.
Changed my entire life to do it.
How so?
You can't go into a project as profound in nature as that without somehow preparing yourself for it. It's like preparing for a fight.
Right.
It's like you have to be fit for the fight, and so you have to spiritually prepare yourself for that, and that's going to take some sacrifice, and because I profess this and I profess that. I'm not a great example of Christianity. I'm just I'm flawed, and I make a lot of mistakes, but I have to try and be better somehow in order to go in and make that film. So what does that mean? I think I know what it means,
Well, one of the things that I thought was
So that was the clip that I thought was representational of his flawed and humble faith. So I really hope that Mel Gibson is genuinely saved, genuinely following Christ. Obviously, his theology is not all there, but we're not saved by our theology. We are saved by our genuine faith. And it's what God has done in us, not what we do on our own. Despite what some people believe about that, it doesn't change how it works. So those are my thoughts on that. I think this was a good thing for Christianity in general. This guy just gave an apologetic for the resurrection, and hopefully many will be reached by the interviews that have happened on the Joe Rogan Experience. Who knew that this would be such a excellent medium for preaching and reaching people with the gospel good news of Jesus Christ? Who knew? Who knew? I mean, God has used the unexpected source to deliver the greatest truth. And that is something to be praising God for. And I really want to see this national revival, which I think is underway, but I'm excited about it. And I'm excited for all the things that are happening in these current times that kind of correlate around that. Because I think, the darkest days might have been behind us. And now we have, we're going to keep it positive in 2025 because, just like my book, Winning, Not Winsome, like we got to celebrate the wins. We're trying to win for Christ down here. We're not trying to be winsome. We're trying to be winning for Christ. So that is, and that's a rebuke of the Big Eva approach, which largely scoffed at the idea of Joe Rogan and much of masculine culture in general. So that's all I got to say about that. And although, as actually one more thing, there was a certain meme involving Mel Gibson that was viewed by a co-host of James White's podcast as being disqualifying to share, which I may or may not make the thumbnail for this video. So that's all I got to say about that. My name's Ray. It's the Evangelical Dark Web. If you like this content, do also subscribe to the channel, to the podcast. If you're new, that's the best way you can help with those magical YouTube algorithms. Have a blessed day. Stay based. Christ is King, and we will catch you on the next one.